Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this very brief and concise conversation about some of the biggest challenges facing the transatlantic relationship in the 21st century. I am very happy to be with you here in Chicago virtually. My name is Catherine Kluver-Ashbrook. I'm the executive director of two research programs at the Harvard Kennedy School, a project on Europe and the transatlantic relationship, and a project on the future of diplomacy. And I, for one, very much hope the Chicago Council will keep these virtual gatherings alive, because as of June, I will be in Berlin, where I will take over as the director of the German Council on Foreign Relations. So it's a particular pleasure to be with you on this cold, rainy Chicago morning, as I understand. But if you're joining us from all over the world, you're just as welcome. We're here to celebrate early Europe Day, which we observe on May 9th as, of course, the significant cornerstone, the signature of the Schuman Declaration, which 71 years ago created, and I say this without hyperbole, I think the greatest peacemaking project, democracy-making project in the history of the world. So I'm particularly glad that drawing conflict in the 21st century, no longer coal and steel, but great power competition and technology. So that's what our agenda is for this morning. We meet at a precarious time. The European Union is going to have to ask itself large questions going forward. We have elections in two cornerstone countries of the European Union in September in Germany, and of course, in April of the following year in France. That cannot, I think we can all agree, paralyze the European Union, particularly not in its partnership with an American administration that has revived and has avowed itself to revive a transatlantic relationship, which flustered and was fragile over the last 4 years. So we will focus on these two challenging questions this morning with three wonderful speakers who I will introduce in just a moment. I have a little bit of housekeeping to do, which is to remind you that the Chicago Council is a nonprofit, independent and nonpartisan platform, and the views expressed by the individuals the Council hosts here are their own. They do not represent the institutional positions and views of the Council. Now, this will be a short 45 minutes, but it will be vibrant if you all participate. And the means for you to participate in this discussion is for you to type into your browser now in the background, ccga.live for Chicago Council on Global Affairs, and begin typing in your questions, ideas, and comments. Many of you have shared your views early with us, and I will integrate those comments into the conversation. But it's my honor to introduce our three esteemed speakers, starting first with our panel and then handing over to the ambassador of the European Union in the United States, our friend here at Harvard, Ambassador Stavros Lambrinidis. But first, let me introduce to you, for all that don't know him, Daniel Hamilton, who is, I think, one of the foremost thinkers on Europe in the United States. He's the director of the Global Europe program at the Wilson Center. He's an Austrian Marshall Plan Foundation distinguished fellow. Of course, it's no coincidence that the Austrian Consul General in Chicago will be seeing us out of this conversation. And he's really, truly, I think, one of the sharpest minds on the issues that we will be discussing today, including on how US foreign policy and EU policy need to interact given the challenges we face collectively. And Ambassador Fernando Neves, who is with us all the way from Portugal today, is the former Secretary General of the Portuguese Ministry on Foreign Affairs and the former Portuguese Secretary of State for European Affairs. He's been responsible for major negotiations, not least that on East Timor and at the diplomatic high level, official high level, and has had various high-level ambassadorial posts, not least to his European counterparts, Ireland, the Netherlands, and Italy, but also to Angola. So before we get into the discussion, let me please introduce Ambassador Stavros Lambrinidis. who was no stranger to these conversations. He's had now, well over a year or two almost to be in this role in Washington, and we're thrilled he can join us. Ambassador Lambrinidis, your thoughts as we go ahead and face Europe Day on Sunday, May 9th. Oh, Ambassador, I don't believe we can hear you. If you could just unmute yourself.
Yes, indeed. So thank you, Catherine. It's a great honor for me to be hosted by the Chicago Council for Global Affairs around Europe Day. Indeed, 70 years this year from the creation of the coal and steel community. Frankly, the Chicago Council has been at the heart of this nation's global outlook for almost 100 years now. Being in the Midwest represents a unique and valued perspective, especially in transatlantic relations, and something that many people don't know, because when they read the resume, they know that I studied at Amherst and then I went to Yale Law School, but they don't know that I began my studies at the University of Chicago in 1980. I transferred to Amherst, and that's because I was a young Greek social democrat who wanted to do economics. And then I went to Chicago, and I was with Friedman, and I was with Stiegler, and all. They're absolutely brilliant minds. But it was not exactly what I thought as a young 18-year-old that I should be doing then. But a city I absolutely love, and I look forward to be able to visiting honestly physically very soon, including the Council. And thank you to Wolfgang Messinger for putting this together and for inviting me to come. I very much appreciate the tremendous coordination of EU member states, embassies and consulates around the country in promoting the European message. My dear friends, we live in extraordinary times, blah, 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 of course, but we have extraordinary opportunities. We have an opportunity today with the Biden administration to come out of COVID stronger and better than before. When it comes to health issues, we have identified the problems that everything from our supply chains to our preparedness had to deal with this pandemic. As we are vaccinating our own people, this is the time to also think real hard about how we vaccinate everyone else in the world. We are, Americans and Europeans, the biggest donor in the COVAX facility. But frankly, until the rate of vaccinations around the world exceeds the rate of mutations of the vaccine, no one is safe. We have a chance to come out much stronger economically. The US has implemented a number of huge stimulus packages up to now, and President Biden has a number more in the pipeline. We in Europe have done the same thing with different systems, different rates of implementation. But the biggest success of COVID, in some ways, a silver lining in a terrible story, is that we managed for the first time in our history to agree to borrow together close to $1 trillion in the open markets in a fund, their economic recovery fund, that now will begin unfolding to all our member states, especially the ones who were most hard hit. We don't do this out of a simple solidarity. We do it because the single market in the European Union is the biggest strength that we have, and the biggest contributor as well to US security and prosperity. And we need to make sure that it survives and gets stronger after we come out. Second challenge indeed is our economies. We are the biggest economic artery in the world, always have been. Nothing has changed this, not the previous administration, not this one. We are creating more jobs on each other's shores than anyone else does through their investment or through their trade. Our business people and our workers vote every day with their feet, going and investing on both sides of the Atlantic. This relationship has to become even stronger now. And we do have a chance to do so. We have to be able to create more jobs through more investment. And when the infrastructure package of the new administration passes, if it does, Congress, that will open up tremendous opportunities for more European investment in this country. We are at the same time dealing and have to deal with some trade irritants that were created in the past few years, whether it's Airbus Boeing tariffs or still aluminum tariffs. The US at the time started a war, let's say, a trade war, a very unwise one against Europe. Europe had to retaliate. This ridiculous, frankly, war has to stop, and we already have frozen with the Biden administration the Airbus Boeing mutual tariffs, and we're working for a solution. And I hope we can do the same with steel aluminum. We have to change the rules of the game when it comes to international trade and the WTO. We have to do it together. No matter what we do, we're very open economies, very dependent on international trade. Others are also exporting now their own values in their own containers the same way that we did up to now. When we put a good in a container, we put in labor rights with which we produce the good. We put in environmental rights with which we produce the good. We put in open competition, no huge state footprint of the economy with which we produce those goods. But others are now put in their own containers, their own values that are quite different. So we do have an international fight on trade and in the economy, and we have to fight it together. And of course, we have to harness digital. Digital is moving fast. It's going to be the future of the economy, the future of our lives. But somebody has to set the standards and the rules for artificial intelligence. The EU came out only a few days ago with its own proposal, a very detailed one, a very narrow one, focusing on risks of AI, not a blanket regulation. But we are taking again the initiative as Europeans, as we did with privacy, to ensure that those cameras that we are creating with AI will not be used for social scoring, will not be used for social repression, and others are setting their own standards again. Third challenge, as far as I'm concerned, is the opportunity that we have, frankly, to save the planet. This is not a hoax. It's a real problem. It's a real challenge. But also to do so in a way that boosts our economies and our societies. And we have to do so in a fair way. And this is precisely what we are doing in Europe. So we have found out that since 1990, we have reduced already our climate emissions by more than 25%. And guess what? We have increased our GDP, not decreased, increased our GDP more than 60%. And that was when we did not yet have economies of scale on all those technologies. It is not contradictory to work for a climate-based economy and for a huge boost in jobs and in growth. It is, in fact, it goes hand in hand. But we have to be able to get everyone else on board. We cannot be just a government-pushed initiative. Private investment is needed. We need a sustainable finance architecture here that Americans and Europeans can agree on, ideally, so that our companies know what they can invest in and can do so massively. And we need an alliance, a green tech alliance, Americans and Europeans. We're the biggest innovators in the world. And these technologies cost money. If we get together and we research together and invest together in them, we will be able to have cost-effective and widely applied technologies, green technologies around the world. Fourth challenge, democracy. We both face it, and we face it internally, and the world faces it more broadly. In the world, we need to build the alliances with countries around the world who may not be full democracies like we are. Maybe they're sitting on the fence, but they do have a commitment to human rights and to democracy to a broader or smaller degree. We cannot allow them to sit on the fence. They have to come to our side. We have to think smarter about how to build those alliances. It's not a matter of pointing fingers. It's a matter of joining hands with countries that are also being, approached now by China, Russia, and others. And we can do this. And internally, we certainly have to deal with disinformation, misinformation. We have to deal with social platforms. We have to fortify freedom of speech. But remember, democracy is the toughest political system in the world, because it requires every citizen, every individual citizen to be informed, to monitor the government, to make decisions. It's not one autocrat that makes the decision. That's easy. So democracy is tough, but that means that citizens ought to be able to have reliable information. We cannot be fighting each other in our own societies like cats and dogs every day. If democracy becomes a zero-sum game in our own societies, if losing an election means for many of our own voters that suddenly they lose all the privileges, that the majority always runs everything and the majority is gone, democracy is flipped on its head. We have a real challenge. Finally, multilateralism in China. I close with this. Dear friends, China is indeed a rising power, economic and political, and it is a deeply problematic power in many things. Not in everything. We have to work with China, and the Biden administration, we agree on this, on everything from climate change to non-proliferation to many other things. But at the same time, we have to make sure that China does not manage to impose its own governance models on others as it tries to expand economically as well. And what I would say there is that we have to do two things, or if you like, three things. The first thing we have to do is to focus internally on how to run faster. We have to invest. It's not just enough to just say, oh, look, China is throwing all this money in its own enterprises. This is unfair. It's not good. We have to invest ourselves in the future of our technologies and economic development. We simply have to do this. We have to run faster. And if we do that, then we also have to protect our runners better, whether it is from intellectual property theft, or whether it is from closed markets, or whether it is from connectivity investment initiatives around the world that China is running that are based on unfair biddings and subsidized investments and debt traps. So a lot of work ahead of us. There's absolutely no question. But I have to say, Dan, and Fernando, two people who will be able to discuss this in depth, that everyone in this conversation will be supremely, I think, blessed to participate in. Thank you so much for this opportunity to everyone, and good luck and good work.
Ambassador Lambrinidis, both quick, comprehensive, and incisive, as always. We've come to count on you just for that type of delivery. I'm going to liken this to the president's speech, because I think you had major streams that I wrote down more than 4 points. But I do think that exactly what we're here to do, which is to discuss the China challenge in its different ways for Europe and the United States, which have different nuances and will force us together in different ways. But then also technology are key issues that drive right through all of those issues, from economic to climate to everything when it comes to our rules-based order. They are challenges and they are opportunities. So I'm thrilled to have these two speakers here, and I will hand over to them momentarily. I do want to issue a moment of apology to my own German consul general. My little piece of paper said Austria, but of course I would be remiss in not recognizing my own national flag, having just visited the consulate in Boston yesterday that provide among the network of consulates of my own home country across this great nation, wonderful service to our citizens. So Ambassador Neves, we have decided to split this up into 2 parts, talk about China first and then digital issues, as Ambassador Lambrinidis mentioned. And I'd like to get your comments before handing over to Dan for a response, and then integrating the questions that our audience will have. And I guess I'll remind you again, the ccga.live is your place for questions. Ambassador Neves, please.
Thank you very much, Catherine. A bit worried because you and Ambassador Lambrinidis said they were trusting in what I was going to say, so I hope I won't disappoint you. But I'd like first to the Chicago Council on Global Affairs for organizing this webinar on such a timely subjects. The fostering of the transatlantic relations is one of the priorities of the Portuguese presidency. It has always been a priority of Portuguese foreign policy. I would like to thank in particular the Consul General of Germany in Chicago, Wolfgang Lozinger, who represents locally the Portuguese presidency of the European Union, and for having invited me as a Portuguese retired ambassador to participate in this debate. I think that the China's strategy of intention to become the world's #1 power is the biggest challenge the United States faced since the end of the Cold War. I would even argue that it is a greater challenge and a more complex challenge than the Cold War. The Cold War was a confrontation between ideology and military power. But economic USSR was never a challenge. Soviet Union had military capacity and military and space technology, but no development technology capacity. I was serving at our embassy in Washington in Reagan's time. I think it was President Reagan, a great statesman in my opinion, that said that we have means to have weapons and butter. The USSR has to choose either weapons or butter. And that was, of course, in part, in a nutshell, an explanation to what led to the changes in the Union. What we have now is a confrontation of military and technological strengths of 2 superpowers. a contest over trade, the economy, the military, geopolitics, and ideology, with China seeking technological advances that will give leverage over other countries. On top of that, there is a wide perception in Western public opinion that China is on the rise, US and West in decline. The astonishing number of young people in Mandarin might illustrate that perception, which seems to be also in Peking, where I think Xi Jinping himself has said that. We have to remember that until this century, the now called liberal international order prevailed in international. The Cold War evolved within the multilateral order designed by the United States after World War II, based on Western values and principles enshrined in the UN Charter. That is that everybody, including the USSR and China when it later joined the United Nations, play the game in our board and with our rules. It is true that the Soviet Union, China, and most other nations systematically violated those rules, but they never frontally denied their ethical basis. That gave the US and Western and like-minded countries, which mostly respected those values, the moral upper hand. This is not anymore the case. After the fall of the Soviet Union,
we may have lost Ambassador Neves for a moment. We're going to give him a few seconds to unfreeze. Sometimes those transatlantic wires don't work quite as well as we might intention. All right, I hope we are going to be able to restore that line. Dan, I see you moving, which means that you're still with us. Ambassador Neves has, I think, laid out the key principal component here, which is to say that, this is really a unique challenge for the United States and for the European Union, because, as he noted, the Soviet Union never had the economic prowess that China has, that I think for the European Union is particularly difficult in now facing what is a strategic discussion on how the comprehensive agreement with China might move forward, how one might balance that with a new formulations of interest in the transatlantic relationship as well. The European economy has to some extent become dependent, as all globalized economies now have, on manufacturing in China. We're seeing this play out in the tech world, but we're seeing this also play out in hard goods. Oh, Ambassador Neves is back. I was trying to filibuster to hand over to Dan, but Ambassador Neves, let's have you finish your thoughts and then go to Dan.
Sorry, I'd like to now thank Pedro Laya, my information technician, without whom it would be a total disaster. Anyhow, I was talking about Russia and China, and they have very good technology of cybernetic interference. So it was a show of their advanced technology. What I was saying that after September 11, things have changed. We lost the moral upper hand. Guantanamo, the invasion of Iraq, the intervention against the UN principles, against international law, gave our adversaries ground to accuse us of using those principles according to our conveniences, like they always have done. On the other hand, the rise of theocratic governments, populist parties in Western countries, as well as the upsurge of autocratic tendencies in Brazil, Turkey, India, Hungary, former democracies, have eroded the Western ethical upper hand and put in jeopardy world liberal order and Western democracies. Western democracy is at its most vulnerable moment since the Second World War. What we call Western values are being put in jeopardy inside European democratic countries, and even Recent events did not tilt those principles and started to infringe and eroding the multilateral order established itself. I must say that it is not very reassuring to see a presidential election in the United States being contested as if it was not a just and fair, free and fair election. It's really not very reassuring. And China is taking advantage of those weaknesses. China does not only wants to rate itself as a world power, but it clearly will not continue to comply with liberal international order and will not accept, as their Minister of Foreign Affairs made very clear recently, to allow the US to have the final word. We cannot forget that historically, by territorial and demographic dimension, ancient culture and civilization, China has always seen itself as a great, if not the greatest power on earth. And it has not forgotten that the West-East expansion led to 500 years of Western predominance and to the almost colonization of China in the 19th century. After Mao's dictatorship, it didn't open politically, but it smoothly evolved from a poor communist dictatorship and controlled economy to an institutional dictatorship of the Communist Party, astonishingly prompt economic development, and the adoption of a modern economy gradually integrated in the world market. The Soviet Union fifth column were the communist parties in Western democracies. China's fifth column are its foreign investments and its foreign loans and its positions regarding world public debt. China has suffered changes symmetric to Western democracies. I mean, a more autocratic system to a personalized and even more despotic nationalistic dictatorship. China does not only intend to become the greatest power, which probably by its dimension, economic growth, and scientific progress, it considers to be its due. It wants to challenge, modify the world order established by the US, the United States, and Western democracies. The confrontation of the Cold War was between two sides whose culture had the same European Christian roots. China does not necessarily share that cultural heritage, and will necessarily abide by principles we consider universal as the basis of an international order, but they might not consider them as universal. Although my experience when I was dealing with East Timor is autocratic regimes in Europe, Africa and Asia always said that we are trying to impose Western values on the oppositions always said, recognize our values, even when afterwards they get the power, they did not respect them. But it's a different thing. Anyhow, this challenge is drastic not only to the US and its European and like-minded allies, but to the civilization postulates predominant for the last 5 centuries. We are in a struggle for the core of the Western civilization, for the survival of the core of Western civilization, and we have to face risks. We must acknowledge Chinese cultural specificities and its sensitiveness regarding its historical position in the world. The US is still the biggest military power and the biggest economy. Due to its political system, America has the biggest capacity to react to new trials. The democratic European countries are the wealthiest in the world with a better quality of life. English is the world's lingua franca, and upper middle class Chinese dress and act according to cosmopolitan universal values. China is assuming an aggressive stance regarding Taiwan or Hong Kong. As President Biden said in his speech at the Congress, President Xi Jinping is deadly earnest about China becoming the most significant, consequential nation in the world, and on that basis install a new international order subjected to China's interests and values. We must heed alerts like the one made by General James Stavridis in his book 2034, A Novel of the Next World War. We must at all costs avoid a war which would all the whole world. We have to consider our strengths and weaknesses, but also Chinese circumstances, namely the integration of their economy and finances in the global world. We must firm and draw a firm red line in defense of what are usually called Western principles, because they are the universal humanitarian values that brought the world to level of civilization we have achieved after centuries of fighting. But as I said, we have to be realistic. If we want to avoid a violent outcome and find a diplomatic way to have a viable world order that takes into account the development and emergency of powers and their legitimate ambitions and interests, we have to avoid at all costs war, find a diplomatic way to achieve this end. The US is facing several challenges in different areas and of different levels, greatest, as it threatens the very Western way of living. It must therefore be addressed together with its Western allies and like-minded countries. The US needs to have total reliance on its European allies. And that's why I consider that Europe must continue to be at the top of American foreign relations priorities. I am encouraged in that sense by statements made so far by President Biden on US-European relations, but also on tax reform, as that may be the only way to reverse the upswing of populism in European countries, even in the United States, by ceasing to squeeze the middle classes that are the foundation of democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Neves. That is really what we would call a tour de force if we were running this event in French. Dan, as I pass over to you, because I see the clock quickly advancing, I think we're going to attempt a merger of these two issues, and I know you're well versed to lean into those. And I'll give you a few audience questions that trickled in before this event to fold into your response here. Of course, our audience members want to know how has precisely what I was saying, what has changed about China's role in the European economy, and how does that influence how we might think about the transatlantic relationship vis-a-vis China, that triangular relationship. And then this leans directly into the latter part of Ambassador Neves's remarks about presenting a united front on the values issue when it comes to human rights. We saw the European Commission president making some quite stringent statements about 10 or 15 days ago on this that then had influence on things like the CAI and how Europe thinks about the relationship to China moving forward. So how can we have a united front confronting human rights abuses and territorial aggression, both from China and Russia, that lean into this democracy point that Ambassador Neves was making? Over to you, Dan.
Thank you, Catherine. I appreciate the opportunity to be with the Council, and congratulations to you on your new position as the head of the German Council on Foreign Relations. That's a big deal in case people aren't paying attention, so congratulations. Given the time, we only have 10 minutes as far as I can say, or less. We could probably dispense with, I was supposed to talk about the digital revolution, but maybe we just drop that. And I won't even do my remarks, but I can comment on what you just said, if you want to stay with China. I think China undoubtedly has become an important partner, both for the United States and Europe in the economy, but we're recognizing that pure economic exchange also brings dependencies and uncomfortable issues with it. And I think we've each approached that, though, in different ways recently. I've been very struck by debate in Europe, there was a report by Eurostat saying that China was the EU's, it was a report, and all the media in Europe said China is Europe's major trading partner. It's just wrong. It's just false. And yet all of the media, especially in Germany, and even German government agencies parrot the same line, because what it is only about is about trade in goods, and was only last year, because of the pandemic, that China was EU's largest trading partner in goods. But that, of course, ignores services, which is where most jobs are, and where the US is clearly far ahead of China in terms of its importance to the European Union and in trade. And if you put goods and services together, the US is clearly the EU's biggest trading partner, bar none. And trade, is not commerce. Commerce is much bigger concept than trade. And our relationship is driven by investment flows. It's how companies really operate. They go to Chicago and build up and set up shop there, or they go to, Berlin or other places and set up shop there. And our investment relationship just dwarfs anything that's going on with China. My quick analogy is EU-China relations are like a country road. It's a 2-lane highway. It's full of goods. It's very thick and bustling. You have an accident on that highway, you're in trouble. And they're trying to build a 3rd lane, an investment lane, but that has now run into problems too, because China is slapping the EU on sanctions because of the values issue. But the transatlantic economy is a 12-lane Autobahn. It's got goods flowing, it's got investment, it's got research and development, the digital world, it's where the jobs are. You just name it, and that's what it is. You have an accident on a 12-lane Autobahn, it's really a big deal. So I think we have lost the focus. The media and much of the commentary have lost their orientation. China is important to us, but it's not the central anchor of our economic relationship. And that builds a lot of opportunity for the US and Europe to move ahead, especially, as I was going to say, in the digital world, because that's the future. So we should build on that anchor of the transatlantic economy rather than think that China is the future of our economic relationship when it's actually not. I think our challenge now is, and you see the EU struggling with this, the EU has said China is a partner in some areas, it's a competitor in some areas, and it's a systemic rival. And the ambassador sort of indicated some of that. The Biden administration has sent something very similar. It's going to be an adversary in some areas, it's going to be a competitor, but we have to have some cooperation in some areas as well. So I think both sides actually are coming together on kind of the frame. I think where we're having some difference is you see some efforts in Europe to compartmentalize those 3 baskets. You do a strike and investment deal, but let's not pay the price for talking about human rights. And I think the administration is trying to say you can't compartmentalize. It's a broader picture here. So I think that'll be our conversation going forward, but I do think we are coming together in sort of understanding the nature of the China challenge and what it means for us. But we should build on our strengths. It's not just about thinking about China, it's about, I would say, as the president says, building back better renewal. Domestic renewal is part of the strategy. It's not something that takes away from your international strategy. Thank you.
I think that really added very well nuanced points to what the ambassador said. I do want to lean into the digital because otherwise your expertise wouldn't be fully pulled on. So let's go ahead and do that because as Ambassador Lambrinidis noted in his opening remarks, we've had difficult moments on key digital issues when it comes to, particularly big corporate questions. Whether it's, the 2 pieces of legislation, which will now have to sort of pass and be ratified on the European side when it comes to the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act, that those are big question marks that the Biden administration had to tackle and is tackling with new personnel, particularly over these months already. But then last week we saw the issuance on AI guidance, I think very interesting for core parts of the administration, but I noted a few things that would make business models for Facebook and Google in Europe very, very difficult. And I say Europe specifically because this includes the UK. Someone brought up in the chat, where is the UK in this conversation? I think we've all been careful to say European Union, yes, but in many issues also mean Europe. And of course, the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, is in the UK right now for the G7 foreign ministers meeting. And particularly on tech issues, the United Kingdom will play a large role, especially when it comes to standards as well, and thinking democracy beyond European shores. So, Dan, there are key and very concrete challenges there for the transatlantic relationship. How do you think about the next couple of months and how that conversation moves forward?
Thank you. Well, yeah, I'm happy to get into it. Again, just as a point of orientation, U.S. exports of digitally enabled services to Europe are double those that the U.S. trades with the entire Asia-Pacific region. And the EU exports of those kinds of services to just one country, the United States, are more than EU exports of those kinds of services to the entire Asia-Pacific region. So not China, it's also Japan, it's everybody. Just one country. Shows you how important the digital economy is to our relationship. So we have tremendous opportunities. The EU has proposed, and I think the administration considering a trade and technology council that could be unveiled at the US-EU summit in June, or some version of that. There is opportunity on both sides to set standards, as Ambassador was talking about, on artificial intelligence. As you said, the EU has come forward with a new type of approach to artificial intelligence that's focused much on privacy protections. But the United States just came out, the Federal Trade Commission also just came out with a big report, similar in some ways to the EU, but it's focused more on consumer protection and against, discriminatory algorithms and things like that, racially discriminatory types of things. So we're not quite aligned, but we're both moving in a similar direction. We have a great opportunity on digital supply chain security. We need to focus on that. I think we agree on that. The UK has to be part of this. And frankly, the way I think at the moment is because the UK is the head of the G7 this year. Tony Blinken is there, but the digital ministers just all met and released a paper spearheaded by the UK that gets us on board, talking about internet safety, data free flow of data with trust. So there are really important opportunities, but we're challenged, if we're honest, with some digital disconnects that have happened across the Atlantic in recent years. The Privacy Shield, which was the regulation for personal data flows across the Atlantic, was rendered invalid last summer by European Court. So this is a court decision. And the EU and US are trying to renegotiate that, but the message is a court decision was as much the European Commission as it was the US, that these arrangements are about different legal regimes. They're not just about a diplomatic fix. So I don't think that renegotiating necessarily is going to solve this. We're going to have to manage differences in our legal regimes. We have a problem with platform regulation. The big platform companies, antitrust as we would call it. EU is moving forward in some areas. Most of those companies are American, and so we have some issues to make sure it's not discriminatory. The whole issue of online content, fighting misinformation, disinformation, we share that concern, and yet we have different approaches to how to do that. And then really the future challenge is the governance of the future internet, which is being shaped in a lot of technical bodies that no one's ever heard of, but actually could influence how the digital order even goes forward. And China is making a big pitch to shape the new internet, as they call it. So my proposal is we have sort of a US-EU platform on data governance in order to manage some of these problems, realizing some of them are not easily fixable because they're rooted in different legal traditions, and some will require legislation. But I think we have a moment to sort of get on track with each other and at least start to now manage those issues rather than let them divide us.
I think your point on looking at the governance components of various parts of the internet, including things like, international communications bodies where China has, as the United States sort of looked away over these past 4 years, really wrangled itself into some central positions. I think for anyone interested in these issues, those nuances are worth paying attention to because, as the ambassador pointed out, there is this background power play going on. And if we're not vigilant in the way that I think that you've described, Dan, by really unifying forces and committing to ironing out those differences, we will surely be poorly for it. And so in some ways, I sort of think we need a new version of a Schuman Declaration, realizing where the new instruments of war, but at least competition are coming from to merge everything that we have held dear. Ambassador, I want to give you for 30 seconds the second to final word before we turn over to the Consul General and try to stick as close as we can to our timeline here. Mr. Ambassador. Oh, you're muted. We need to hear you.
I would just like to say regarding your remarks, and what I'd like also to thank what Dan Hamilton said. We think that the United States should be the leading country confronting the challenge we, the West, now have. And as I said, to say it bluntly, I think the European Union should be the backyard of the United States policy and be totally reliable for the United States. And having said that, we have another danger, which is the internal rise of anti-democratic movements, be it in the United States, be it in Europe. And the problem, and I'm now addressing, the problem is that, as I said, it's not reassuring for European democracies what has happened in the United States in the last years, namely, for instance, the occupation of the Congress. I mean, nobody thought to see that happening in a democracy like the United States. And we have strong populist movements, be it in France, Italy, Spain, and especially in the Eastern European countries, where some measures have not been considered to be aligned with the democratic principles. So I think that was the point of my intervention. And as I said, it's the Portuguese presidency position that we should work together and tighten even more transatlantic relations, which are, of course, I think, fundamental for both sides. Thank you.
I think, Ambassador, you've underscored a key theme in the address to the two houses of Congress we heard the president make last week, which is to say that the lines between domestic policy and foreign policy have been thoroughly erased. And I think that very much applies to a situation we find in Europe as well, and that it has to be first and foremost about restructuring and strengthening our democracies from within to be able to jointly take on the challenges that both of you have so eloquently mapped out. Speaking of democratic elections, the Consul General of Germany and every German citizen on this call faces that vote in September, the end of an era with Angela Merkel departing government. And I always talk about my own home country is playing a pivotal role in the debates that were mapped out today. So it's really my honor to hand over to the Consul General of the Federal Republic of Germany to conclude this conversation.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you to our two panelists, Ambassador Neves and Dan Hamilton, who have so skillfully elaborated on two of the main global challenges. And thank you to Matt Abbott and the whole team of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs for your partnership in this program. We appreciate very much that you took up our proposal straight away and provided the platform for our discussion and much more. Today's event was dedicated to the 2021 Europe Day. And thank you to Ambassador Lambrinidis for his initial words. There will be more events on and around Europe Day proper, which is May 9th. The EU-US Future Forum, in which the EU delegation and the Atlantic Council convene leaders and stakeholders in dialogue to develop a new transatlantic agenda. And Ambassador Lambrinidis will kick off the Europe House Party to usher in Europe Day on May 8th. If I may use the opportunity on my own behalf as German Consul General to advertise a symposium that we organized together with partners from the University of Michigan, Georgetown University, and the Chicago Council next week. And it's exactly the theme that Ambassador Neves just mentioned, to strengthen our own democracies. It is dedicated to efforts to revitalize industrial regions in Europe, North America, focusing on the Midwest and Canada, Germany, France, England, and Poland, with the intention to create a network of decision makers which puts this item on the transatlantic agenda as well, and will help to counter populism in all these countries and areas. Today, I'm speaking on behalf of the Consuls General of the EU member states represented here in Chicago. The role of local chair of this group rotates together with the presidency. Although Germany's presidency already ended on December 31st, I have the honor to serve in this role for the first semester of 2021, standing in for the presidency of Portugal. That is why Ambassador Neves took over the European part of this discussion. I would like to give credit to my colleague Alejandra Bilguero at the Portuguese Embassy in Washington, who made the liaison with Ambassador Neves, and to Mr. Nelson de Castro, the Honorary Consul of Portugal in Chicago. We wanted our contribution to the 2021 Europe Day to be a distinctive event honoring the heartland of America in which we serve. We all cover a huge territory with many states in this industrial and agricultural powerhouse of America. This area is much more linked to the world than many outside observers might suspect. That is why we thought it might be fitting not to concentrate only on transatlantic bilateral relations, but to open up the horizon on global challenges which we can tackle together. We also wanted to be faithful to the mission of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, who concentrates by definition on global affairs. The two topics we covered today, China and digitalization, are certainly two of the top 5 challenges we face. Others are climate change, the threat of liberal democracies by authoritarian behavior globally and within our own societies, as well as attacks on multilateralism. Since last year, we have to add public health on an international scale to this list. By discussing these two topics as examples, we noticed one thing with utmost clarity. The United States and the European Union have much more in common in values and in strategic interests than divides them. We hope that we can continue this truly global debate very soon in person in the premises of the Chicago Council with other distinctive speakers. For today, I thank you all for listening and for participating through your questions. I wish you all a wonderful rest of the day and stay healthy. And let's look forward to the time when we can combine these virtual meetings with meetings in person again. Thank you very much.
Generalkonsul Messinger, thank you, Dankeschön, for these important Schlussworte, as we would say in German. I think we can all agree that this is a work that has to happen within all of our countries, which underscores the importance of the Chicago Council. It underscores roles like the regional forums that the German Council on Foreign Relations underwrites in all of Germany. Democracy is a work of, to paraphrase Ernest Renan, which has to happen tous les jours, every single day. And so I thank all these panelists for being here, offering their vivid reflections, not only on the future of our two democracies on both sides of the Atlantic, the critical role that the European Union has to play over the next decade in healing or bringing conversation to the table between the global superpowers. I thank you all for being here, for your vivid questions, which I tried to incorporate in our conversation. Be well, be safe, be healthy, and to soon again in person in Chicago or elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.